Lots of sunshine in here still. Praise Father. I'm going to welcome back to the stage Barbara Klicka. Yesterday you heard from her and she gave you a fire hose of information, and she has just as much, I'm sure, on today. So I hope that you'll give her your attention and your hearts are open to receive. Thank you. Barbara Klicka.
Good morning. Thank you. Abba Father, once again, I invite your presence. I ask that you would pour through me the things that you have been teaching me and us as a community for the well-being and benefit of these, your people here, that you would show them what you want them to know. And I ask, Abba, that you would take it directly to the hearts and the ears of those people who need to hear it. And please just dry up and blow away as chaff anything that is not important. To you be all glory and all honor. We are willing, we are asking and praying that your will be accomplished here on earth, in this place, as it is in heaven. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. Okay, I hope you're all rested and going for another day here. Shabbat Shalom. Today is the question of what are you going to do with all those sheep that show up? Because they are coming. You might not have 1,000, but even 5 can be pretty troublesome. This is what we talked about, and I think you've been hearing the same thread through almost every speaker, that Yahweh desires unity and echad among his people. And that would be unity, but not uniformity. So as you're hearing a common thread through all of those who are speaking, I think you're probably also hearing a little bit of difference or variation here and there. And I think that's really good. That's part of the wholeness. But Yeshua said, as quoted in John in what they call the high priestly prayer, that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you have sent me. So that's a confirmation that that is his desire and plan for us, to be in unity and echad with one another and with him and with creation. But we know that the evil one desires chaos and strife and division. If you're a student of the sevens, a thematic study of sevens through Scripture, anybody has done that? Oh, I see a couple nodding heads. Thank you. Maybe those online have too. We look at the 7 feasts, the 7 churches, the 7 spirits resting on Yeshua, and when we compare that with what's going to be happening in the end times, then we would see that that final tactic is to create strife and division. Oops, wrong. Okay, thank you. I'll try not to pull it off. Okay. So the evil one is doing everything that it can, and that is the scheme of the age. And I think that is part of the reason why we're seeing so much struggle and division. It works directly in people's mind, will, and emotions, which we'll be talking about a little more today. And it works through the world and the flesh. Until we are back in the land, we don't have the physical walls and the boundaries and protections that would be there. But I've understood, and I talked a little bit yesterday, that those walls here now, before we go back to the land, have to do with our relationships and our assemblies. I was able to mention just a little bit yesterday about one of the 13 Hebrew words that means wall, chomah. I've been studying that for now almost 7 years, well, a little more than 7 years. And this particular word for wall, I just want to review quickly, has to do with joining and encompassing. Or in other words, this wall has to do with being in relationship with itself and with what it contains. So there's sort of a personification here that this type of wall is not just a straight barrier, but one that comes around. So it's used very often of the wall around the cities. Gesenius points out that it's also used of a maiden, chaste and difficult of approach. So there's a personification not only of people, but of a woman. The other thing that I found recently was in Clark's Etymological Dictionary, that in-laws or parents are also called chomah, because part of their calling and their work is to encircle and protect the couple. So as we were looking at that picture, I started thinking, encircling, encompassing, protecting, that sounds a little bit like what an Ezer Kenegdo is called to do. That's the Hebrew behind helper or helpmeet. Genesis verse 2:18, and the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." The Azer part refers to a helper or a deliverer, and Yahweh uses that term of himself. So it isn't anything that would be considered inferior. The kenegdo part of the phrase has to do with being a counterpart, speaking for what is good and against what is bad. So this is what we were starting to see, that not only are the sheep being brought up and growing to be more and more like the shepherd, as living stones, they're also being built together and being made into a wall, which eventually becomes the spiritual house. So as I'm seeing this, that when we are restored, men and women together will comprise Messiah's bride. And so together we will join as a wall and will speak for what is good and against what is not. If you'd like to know more about that, I do have a pre-publication copy there of Prepare Messiah's Bride. I am a wall in need of rebuilding. It's out there at the table. There's also some information on the website if you'd like to know. So here we are. We're in transition. We're still pretty confused about what we're supposed to be doing while we're here in this land before we get back to the land. And a lot of times people are ending up being alone, and they're feeling alienated from their family and their old friends and maybe their church history, and they don't even know how to find groups. How do you connect with them? They're not so easy. Then when they do find a group, they might be relieved and they're very joyful at first, but after a little while you find out that you don't necessarily agree on everything, and sometimes those people that you were thankful to find become adversaries. And this is the difficulty. I saw this in some of the conference respondents in the survey here from this group. About 75% of the people that are in an assembly, I asked how long they've been in existence. About 75% of them were no older than 5 to 7 years. And I checked in the group that's of the people who've been in Torah about 20 to 25 years, and it's about 75%, 5 to 7 years. And 15 years ago, I did a similar survey, but just of leaders around the country, and guess what? The major amount of groups were 5 to 7 years. So I'm starting to wonder, is there some kind of a shelf life, for assemblies, or what is this? Because it seems that initial enthusiasm, and how you're in the sponge stage, you want to soak up and learn everything about Messiah that you didn't know before. It seems like that will carry a group for a while. But then when those differences start coming in, they don't necessarily know how to relate to each other, and they don't know how to solve the problem. So instead of being able to find the unity, achad, through the Word, and the study of the Word is what we would recommend, they end up breaking up. And there's a great cost. I think I mentioned that yesterday. There's a great cost every time a group breaks up. And it's not only for the people who leave, it's also for the people who are there. Because we're talking agricultural things here, right? So it's like taking a mother plant and grafting that slip in. You all know, you gardeners, right? You have to cut the parent stem and pry it open a little bit. And then you got to take that slip and make sure it's kind of raw on the edge and slide that in there and bind it together. So you're working on your coming together as a community, but if it doesn't take, for whatever reason, when that person leaves, it's not only the shoot that is torn out, it's that parent stem or the existing group that now has a scar. And we as a small community have experienced that a lot. We don't always understand why people come and why they go, so we do have to keep referring that to Yahweh to do what he's going to do with it. So in the course of these last number of years, we have been having special events where we want to encourage brand new people. Sometimes people who are not brand new still come to those events. But we've been able to identify a few things in the last couple of years that we hope will be of help to other people, both when you're forming groups and when you're trying to decide maybe what group you want to go into, and you want to see where people are in that process. So we've identified that there are some things that seem to be very common to everybody. seems to us that there's 4 individual steps in belief process that people make as they're coming out of the tradition, the denominations or the non-denominational churches or whatever individual work you did. The first realization is that all of the word is true and valid for today, and beginning to walk the feasts and keep the food guidelines and things like that. According to our surveys in both groups, it's pretty much 98-99% on walking the feasts and the food guidelines, and then the changes drop off a little bit after that. So having made that shift, which is big enough, right, because you're leaving behind the tree festival and the egg festival and all the things that other people do that we don't do anymore. So that first one is big. The second shift that we see happening in people is the realization that salvation alone, that sort of basic Christian belief, and the individual focus on self and what it is that God can do for me is not the end goal. The spiritual sanctification process is ongoing. We've had quite a few discussions with several people in particular that they really couldn't comprehend that God has a standard that he wants us to grow into. They were thinking more along the lines of he needs to do what it takes to please us. And so that's a big shift. And when you're talking to somebody, you can tell where they are in those two places. And so here's my clue, because we were learning it. We were learning it as we go. You probably better modify how you talk to them, depending whether they've made that shift or not. The next one we see is the realization that not only is it not all about me, that belly button Christianity, it's all about Messiah and learning to submit to him. It's about maturing. It's about both Papa's and Mama's Torah. It's a spiritual process, and there's a personal work in the soul that needs to be done. The next stage that we have identified, I don't know how many people are here yet. We're looking at this. The realization of the need for the corporate identity, the Torah community, and the corporate righteousness as part of the preparation for the bride, which is a corporate body. Now, someone told me I better make sure and explain that I don't mean a business or a corporation when I say corporate. I mean a composite group of people, a body of people. And so, we are so used to that individual mentality. And I put one of the articles in the newspaper, I called it, I have Jesus in me, so just let me be. Don't talk to me about any of that stuff. So those are the steps we see that people are making in that individual transition. And we've also observed, there it is. We've also observed that there seem to be about 4 different levels of community. And when I use the word community, you might really only have pair, just, in your own house. You might have 2 pairs. You might have a family group. You might have a group of unrelated people who are choosing to get together. I'm not specifying how big or how small the group needs to be. For this purpose, I'm just looking at the function and how they're working together to describe that, because we found that to be very helpful. The first thing that usually happens is people get together occasionally when they find somebody who has Torah as all valid for today perspective. And you're so thrilled to find them. You'll drive 3 or 4 hours if that's what it takes. And unfortunately for a lot of people it does. And you get together now and then and you study Torah, you pray, you worship, you enjoy one another's company. But there is no particular commitment, group identity, or specific leadership. And that can go on for a long time. These steps are not automatically progressive. A lot of people stay, a lot of groups stay at this point. The second level we see is where it begins to develop a little bit more commitment, a casual kind of commitment to regular Torah study and prayer and worship together. There still isn't a group name or a group identity, but there is probably some influential people who work together. Often there's a very gifted teacher that people will gather under in order to learn. The third stage we see is when people begin to look at the importance of commitment to one another, to Messiah, in order to study Torah, worship, and pray together. These are intended long-term relationships. There is a specific group identity, there's specific leadership, there's boundaries. I don't know about you, but in our area, when we talk boundaries with people who are in Torah, they think it's a 4-letter word. So, yeah, some people are smiling. Boundaries are a 4-letter word for a lot of people, especially if you're on the wrong side of it. So that would be a stage that we're seeing that as your community develops, this would be an issue. And again, this would be more for when you're developing an independent one. These kind of boundaries are more established when you have a large group that's already been in existence for a long time. I think that these dynamics would still apply to like little cell groups that would be spinning off from churches. I think these same dynamics would work. And the fourth stage we've identified is all of stage 3 plus being in close daily living relationships, like the camp in Canada. Yes, that Tom Stapleton talked about. Yeah, that kind of covenant living in a Torah pursuant covenant community. For a long time in the survey results over these last couple months, there was nobody that answered that category. Eventually, there turned out to be 3. So somewhere around here, there's 3 people who have been living in a covenant Torah community. We see that this whole process is one of moving from Shema to Shamar. We've learned to Shema, hear and obey. And in English, it's translated as hear often. But from a Hebraic perspective, to hear is to do. So when we learn how to Shema, that's an important thing. That's why we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart and mind and strength. We're to keep his charges, his statutes, and his judgments, and his commandments. That's Deuteronomy. And then we see Yeshua repeating that. But it's if you love me, keep my commandments. Well, keep, that's different. That's Shamar, which can be translated as to guard and to preserve and protect. So when you start learning to hear and then obey, that's those earlier steps where you're starting to move away from what you were doing and be obedient to what Yahweh is asking. But now that next step as you're moving forward is to begin to guard it. So I don't just wait to see if I might not need to do any shopping on Shabbat. I make sure that I do my shopping on Friday. I don't wait to see if I might possibly be able to take a vacation day in order to keep Pesach. I plan it ahead in my vacation schedule. So that step of Shamar is really an important one. And what we have observed, maybe you guys have too, is that if somebody's in those first stages, level 1 and 2 of their transition, or in a level 1 group, and you start talking about guarding, the word that comes back is, you're being controlling, or you guys must be in a cult because you're expecting too much of me. So we can't necessarily keep people from reacting the way they react, but we at least want to try to be sensitive and speak the truth in love. We are being told not to forsake our assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So I think the day is drawing near, right? We've established that. So even though we get frustrated with these people and we have trouble with relationships, his word says we're not supposed to forsake our assembling together. I think I know now, almost 20 years later, I know a lot more now about why people want to forsake assembling together, right? The struggle here is both individual and in the assembly. So that's, I hope, a message that I can convey to you today, because it's what Yeshua has been teaching us. We need to pay attention to both the individual things that are going on and what's happening in the community level. I know there are some people who reject any kind of psychological language because they think it's, psychobabble. I have to tell you, a lot of my professional manuals got thrown out a long time ago because, a lot of them are psychobabble. But there's a few things that are still important because he did create us with both spirit and body and soul. So it is entirely possible that we have people who have the spirit, their own human spirit, and the Holy Spirit residing in them, that born a new heart. And their intent is for echad. But unfortunately in their body or their soul, which in our Western thought is mind, will, and emotions, they're not very much in echad. So it's difficult to communicate when there are differences in maturity. And if you've noticed this, if you're with a group of people, and that group of people is walking in, well, let's just say, if you're wanting to join a gang, the things that the gang does, pretty soon you want to do that too, right? So that you fit and you belong. But we want that principle to be working for the good. So when you come together with an assembly, we're hoping, I think that's Yahweh's design, is that assembly has a lot of individuals who are all learning more about walking in righteousness. And so it creates that pull to move you that way. That's why it's really important who you choose to associate with. So any assembly is not better than no assembly. Need to be careful and discerning about that. On the other hand, if people are not strong in their faith and somebody comes in that's operating in an unholy way, that can draw people down. And I think that's why we're told to be aware that just a little leaven can leaven the whole lump. We don't want to go there. People are different in their maturity, in their capacity to understand and take in information. Some people really do well with this format, of talking. Some of us would rather have hands-on. Some do better with little vignettes or skits or baseball songs. Yeah. Or fictional stories of meeting the Nephilim. Yeah, those, whatever it takes to help people understand. We want to use those pathways as long as we're moving in righteousness and helping them move toward righteousness. But we have so many differences. Just in this group, I think I said yesterday, there's 16 different denominations listed that we're all coming from. So our language is different. Our cultural background is different. And as far as I'm concerned, once I understood that the God of Israel used the Hebrew language and he used the Hebrew people to bring his message, I'm thinking if I have to have a bias, it's probably a Hebrew bias that I should be looking for and working from that perspective. But it's not easy to get there for everybody. Our terminology differs. I grew up Lutheran. You say baptism to me, I'm picturing an infant up at front with the little font, and they sprinkle a little water, You say baptism to a Baptist, what do they say? Dunk, yeah, dunk, yes, the whole thing. Yeah, so I had an argument with Yahweh over that when he told me I needed to be baptized. It was in '99. I argued for a year, I'm sorry to say. I kept saying, but I was baptized already. I don't want to be offensive, and think like it didn't take the first time or something. So finally I said, well, all right, I'll yield. I'll go be baptized. So I was going to talk to the pastor at the Lutheran church, and I heard no immersion. Oh, well, this was September in Wisconsin, and our water gets kind of stiff around that time of the year. So I couldn't find anybody with a baptismal font that was ready to go, so we did have to go in Green Bay. So my prayer partner, Janelle, and then our oldest daughter, Karen, actually at the last minute decided to be immersed that day too. We've understood later that was our mikvah in preparation for ministry. We didn't know that at the time. It's so good that he does these things, even if we don't know. So the terminology differs. You can probably think of others, like communion. When you hear communion, what do you think? Does everybody go up to the front by the rail, or does the little cup get passed around? All those different procedural things. So when you're talking with somebody who's coming into this transition, you're saying one word and you've got this picture in your mind, but they're hearing that word and they've got that picture in their mind. And so how do we find that common ground? And the expectations differ. Oh my goodness. How involved should the leadership be with the leaders, with the people in the church? I mean, really, is it your place to ask how I spend my money? Is it your place to ask whether I'm sleeping with my boyfriend? Is it okay for there to be a standard? How can we move on with that? And when is that okay to do? We have different expectations. We have different degrees of stability. We were just talking about that. My professional training told me that there would probably not be very many people with severe trauma and people with dissociative identity disorder, so I really didn't need to worry about that too much. Maybe I'd see 5 or 6 people in my whole professional time. Well, I've seen dozens and dozens, and I've seen a whole bunch more that I can see need to do some recovery work, but they haven't decided to do that yet. So it's kind of like my high school typing teacher who told me I didn't need to learn the numbers because nobody does the numbers. But then I had a job with an insurance company for a while, and I did have to learn how to type the numbers. So you do, even whatever your expectations are, he knows the rest of it. So he's laying in things that we wouldn't even expect. So my suggestion is we need to find a common language. And our common language needs to allow for both the individual needs, those sheep that we talked about the other day, the bedraggled ones as well as the white ones, and the living stones that need to be built together into that wall. So my hope here today is to help present some of those basic tools to address those personal needs for people who are in transition, and then also to do a little bit about what you need to do at an assembly level to deal with the relationships and the walls and the basic tools to address the needs of the assembly. Our preference is always for leadership people to be in joint leadership, and that's sometimes hard to manage, but I've heard others this weekend confirm that too, the biblical picture. And at that point then, it helps to have somebody to share the burden with so that you can be evaluating the individual needs and the community needs. We do think that teaching Torah is foundational, especially as the transition is being made and people are in that process of reevaluating what their faith expression is and what it should be. Our primary goal that we've been working with in our local community, and we want to encourage other communities as well, however large or small, is to build a strong assembly that can withstand the schemes of the adversary. I don't know how much, some people are not very aware of that, but there are a lot of things that are being done to create that strife and division between your ears and behind your eyes, as well as in your relationships with other people. So our idea is to help people identify and diffuse those individual transition struggles that are normal and those community transition struggles that are normal from the ones that aren't normal, the ones that are people are having too much trouble, there's too much conflict, and things that need to be addressed so that the individuals can continue to grow and the assembly can get past that 7-year mark and keep growing and maturing as a group as well. The other thing we want to do is be able to help teach people to differentiate between those simple normal struggles and severe damaging situations and behaviors. This is especially important for anybody that wants to do jail and prison ministry. Do we have anybody here that there were 60%, I think, of the people said they were interested in jail and prison ministry as an appropriate thing within assembly, but I didn't ask how many are actually doing it. So any hands? We have jail and prison ministries? Okay. Well, I was really pleased to see that there were that many people that recognize that it's important, because in Wisconsin, we've had a prison aftercare network involvement since 2008, helping people who've come out of prison. We've had five men, 4 of them are sex offenders, and now Belinda and Janelle, our other leader, are going to be doing a Torah class in the local jail starting in the next month or 2. But we had a terrible time. We couldn't find anybody else to be interested. And it's such a direct command, I think I saw that on the screen earlier in the last day or two too, about, whoever you give a drink of water to and visit, you have visited me. And yet it's a difficult and scary thing. And it's important and it's appropriate to be cautious, because it is difficult to deal with people and you do need to be prepared. We've spoken a lot locally about the challenges of considering whether troublesome people are sheep or goats, or are they just immature wheat, or are they those tares that we've been warned about, or are they outright wolves? So yeah, isn't that a good wolf picture? And you see the little lamb shaking there? That's a lot of people, I think, that they're making a transition and they're scared, because I don't want to be tricked, and my friends are telling me you're doing something weird. So we need to be able to practice discernment in how we're determining what's going on with our people. because the intervention is going to be different depending on whether they're a shaky lamb or a snarling wolf. Now we have to be aware that really only Yahweh knows the heart and the intentions, but we are told to consider the fruit. And we have decided that the observation of patterns of behavior can help us in that process. If you look this up, you'll see that Yeshua and the disciples did not hesitate to identify false teachers and even outright wolves. And if we don't identify them, we run the risk of the integrity of the walls of the assembly. So we have that risk. If we don't address them, they can overrun and cause difficulty. But on the other hand, those people may be the ones who are most in need of what we can offer. And do we really believe that the Ruach has the ability to change people? So that ongoing tension, they have needs, we can offer. How much is safe, how much is not? That's something that requires a lot of prayer and a lot of discernment. David did have to use his sling and stones against forces of danger, and so do we. As we're coming together, there is that problem, as I said, sort of an elusive agreement on basic definitions. What really is appropriate behavior, and what really does maturity mean? Maturity is a word that's not used in the Old Testament in the King James, but if you're looking at the pictures, you'll see seeds and seedlings and trees and trees that clap their hands and all the different aspects that are agricultural that do talk about a beginning and a middle and a maturing stage. So it's there. It may not always be obvious. And what exactly does constitute an elder? In the church that I grew up in, an elder was whoever was willing to spend the time to come to the meetings. In some churches, an elder would have to have attained a certain age. Some places they would have to be voted in. There's, again, there's all those different ways. So we're looking for that common definition. And we would say that some things need to be held loosely. It's important not to get dogmatic about some things that we really can't prove. Our opinion is fine, but it might just be our opinion, and we need to be careful and not try to foist that on other people. I would observe that in communities where there's more mature people, it's easier to have differing understandings, and you can kind of coexist without it becoming a struggle. If there is a lower level of maturity in the group, everything becomes an issue, and everything is difficult. Is there a basis for understanding the need for teaching the Word and teaching on maturity? And here's one. I believe there's more than one, but here's one basis that we have. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. We were discussing this in a teleconference group at one point and looking at all the different word study parts of it. General understanding, I think, for most people is that the instruction of your father has to do with the knowledge of Torah and the ins and outs of Torah. And the general instruction is that the children are under the instruction of the mother, developing character and all of that aspect, maturity, before they're turned over to the father for teaching. The second part, the instructions of your father and the law of your mother, will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. It's not adi, ornament like jewelry from eternity. It's a different word that has to do with something that wraps around your head. And the chains about your neck, we got the instant picture of a bridle here. Because there's a balance, the knowledge of Torah and the interpersonal and character development. When you're letting yourself be guided by both father's and mother's instructions, you have a better chance to go on the straight path. If we lean too much on one rein, we go in circles. And I think there's a lot of Torah communities, well, sometimes churches too, they lean on the knowledge part, but they haven't done very much on the character part. So this is where we're seeing an important thing. Solomon warned us, it was right there in Proverbs, but we've forgotten to apply it. I was very happy to see, again, in the survey responses, it was, of the conference respondees, 75% said they would welcome maturity and relational skills and training. I thought, yay, good for you. Because what I've heard before, I think a lot of people weren't so happy about that. Although it is true that it's really good to have maturity and character training for them. But I don't necessarily need it for me, right? So that's why it's a little bit harder. I would say that as communities are in their earlier years of transitioning and coming into Torah, the teaching of focus is probably appropriate in levels 1 and 2. But as people are developing and moving on, even all those troublesome relationships, we really do think that it's important to move on to include the shepherding aspect of it as well. Because if you don't, it's sort of like not letting those children grow up. And it seems to us that the shepherding is kind of more on the line of Mama's Torah, and it needs to be done in conjunction with Papa's Torah. My suggestion is that's part of the reason why we have so many different denominations and so many different understandings of things, because we've concentrated on knowledge, but not enough on the character development and the maturity before you start trying to interpret the word. And these skills are needed not only in assemblies, but also in families. So I'm going to be talking about the body, the mind, the will, and the emotions here now. This is part of that individual need that we have to be able to move forward and mature. This is what Nikki called the nitty gritty of relationships. So she's the one who gave me the title here for today. It's that thing of confirming what's good and identifying what's not good, keeping in what's good, keeping out what's bad. It's important to recognize that we have a need for maturity in many areas: physical, mental, emotional, relational, spiritual. And if you were wondering, getting older is not the same thing as getting mature. Yeah. So there are a lot. I've seen 37-year-old people who are really about 13, and so the way you respond and react to them tactfully, because they are adults, so you need to respond tactfully and know how to help them. So how do you identify with that? There are also, I'll skip that for now. The recognition of character traits and personality issues. This is one where I think Yahweh was wise in giving me the background that I have, because I learned all that before I was learning the shepherding part. But other people need this too. So I've been trying to find ways. So if you go on our website, you'll see all kinds of articles about how to understand these sorts of things, because a lot of people don't have the background. We need to look for people who are behaving out of fear. They're making decisions out of fear rather than out of love. And how many of us have heard, the rebelliousness is as witchcraft? But do you know the second part too? Stubbornness is as idolatry. So yeah, you do know that. So these are things we need to be aware of. Passive-aggressive behavior. How can a community come to Echad if half your members are sitting back in the weeds and they don't want to commit to what they really believe, what they really say, what they'll really do? It's pretty hard. So I don't know, maybe 6 years ago? I have to remember, something like that. 6 years ago, we as a community made an agreement that when we recognize passive-aggressive behavior with one another, that we would call it out. And the purpose is not to be mean and not to embarrass anybody, but the purpose is to call to holiness, to call to righteousness, and to say, if you're going to behave in that way and you're not really being upfront, then how can we reach Echad? So where the one person, if it's one person hiding in the weeds, it's bad enough, but if it's half, wow, how do you get anywhere? The other thing that's been really popular in the mental health cycles in the last year or two, maybe a little more, is narcissism. And boy, we hate that, right? The idea of looking out for yourself, and that pride thing, that I in the middle of pride that gets all the attention. That's very closely related to the narcissism. Another way to think about that is self-justifying behavior, that whatever we're doing is perfectly reasonable. We don't understand why other people have a problem, but we're not so sure that what they're doing is reasonable. And the thing is that everybody has some degree of self-justifying behavior. That's not the problem. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who act like that all the time. So that's another thing. If we saw that as an issue in our community, we would probably make another agreement. Hey, we're going to call each other out on this so that we can be cleaned up. I mentioned the community deliverance prayer yesterday, and we do have extra copies of that at our table out there, which is one part of how we as a community have invited Yahweh to step in and to expose to us where there's anything in us or between us that's not pleasing to him, because we want to be cleaned out and not have anything in us that the evil one can hook onto and drag us into places we don't want to go. So we really strongly want to recommend anybody that's in a group that is beginning to move towards consistency, please take a copy of this and pray through it. It's not magic, it's not a specific way to do it, but it is some guidelines. There's a little bit more in there about forming and breaking, and the difference between a community that started because of a falling out that was never resolved, or a community that started because of a sending out. I think there's different roots there too. So there's a little bit in here on that for you to consider at your assembly level. The other thing is the existence of severe trauma and mind control. I was just talking with somebody over breakfast that unfortunately these things are way a lot more common than most of us want to believe. And I don't have time to go into a lot of that, but I was told I wouldn't see much of it, but I did. So the specific things that happen in the brain literally change your brain functioning. And it's important if you have somebody coming to you that's having troubles, that you have somebody in your community that knows how to recognize it. Not that they necessarily know what to do about it, but in any case, to be loving and to find a way to help them find what they need is really important. There's also the question of people who have criminal behavior. I know they've been doing studies, and there's some questions about chromosomal basis for that. I can't even get into that. But in a Hebraic understanding, the bent of the personality is more or less a permanent thing. So here again, we have the question, is Yahweh really able to help people change? And does he do it only directly with them, or does he do it through the connections in the assembly that he's with, that the person is with? We would say that a Yahweh honoring response would be to exhort and encourage one another toward wholeness and becoming more like Yeshua, rather than just trying to tolerate or excuse their behavior. One person, as I said, behaving in these ways can infect the entire community, and if these things are not addressed, then somehow the people seem to influence other people, and they become uninterested in wholesome good things, and they start sneering at them, and the strength and the health of the entire community can be undermined over time. I've seen this particularly in youth groups, but I've seen it with adults as well. So I'm asking Abba Father now, please give each one in this situation your eyes to see and your ears to hear, and perseverance enough to resolve it well. Hopefully each one of us being better equipped will help us deal and be aware of it. It seems obvious, as I said, that most people won't have time to become extremely knowledgeable about all these things. Someone told me once that nobody wants to learn how to swim until they're in the deep end of the pool. I would advocate preparation in advance, not only for you, but also equipping people in your group so that it doesn't become a problem. So here are some of those simple tools that I mentioned. Ultimately, we have a choice. I think this would be emotional responsibility. We have a choice to have faith in Yah, or we have a choice to operate under fear to the adversary. And each of the decisions that we make are going to be influenced by where we stand as we make them. The lie that trips so many people up has to do with fear. Something comes up that threatens the safety of yourself or a loved one, and we get tripped into fear, right? Well, we know that Yeshua could help, but we're not exactly sure that he will help. So then we're struggling with a little bit of unbelief, to say the least. And truthfully, if you have an occult or a ritualistic background, many times they've been taught that Yeshua can't help. because they want to teach that Yeshua and Hashatan are brothers, that they're both preternatural beings. But no. We know Yeshua is supernatural, above all of that. So we're not going to fall for that one, right? But unfortunately, a lot of people do. So once you've gotten that far down the road, the lie is there's a threat, and Yeshua could help, but he might not. So if he might not help, then I guess if he won't, I have to do something. And there's that pride thing again. And it can be an arrogant kind of pride. Well, I'm the one who's got to fix this. Or it can be entire desperation if I don't do something. So, this is not to point fingers at anybody's being prideful in the negative sense. It also can be prideful that in my fear, I think I'm the only one who can fix it. And guess where that takes us? Straight to that rebellion thing. So if I'm experiencing fear and I don't believe for sure that Yeshua can help, then I have to, then if I have to do it, then I'm going to do it my way. That's rebellion, right? And guess who loves that when we fall into that? Because if we didn't have an open door before for the evil one to have influence in our life, we sure do now, because it's been opened up. And the nasty thing about it, I don't know if others can relate to this, but what I see is it seems like the evil one leads us into these situations that cause us to be fearful and then says, see, you were afraid, so I have license to bother you. Okay. The next thing that I have done through the years, looking for a way to help people understand, is to find I kind of used a hand teaching. Okay, because you always have your hand with you. You can do an audiovisual presentation for those people that don't just get words. So when I first developed this, I didn't have a Hebraic understanding yet, so I was looking at a way to explain to people how this all works together, how we can move forward in maturity and what our barriers are. So if you want to hold your hand up with me, you can do that. Turn the palm to yourself. Your thumb represents the human spirit. Your first finger represents the body, and the fingers are mind, will, and emotions. In our Western mindset, we would say soul. In a Hebraic understanding, they would probably say heart, because mind, will, and emotions are all incorporated in the heart. So if you'll just humor me, I'll just say soul right now, but understand that it's, there's that, divergence, controversy over exactly how to parse it exactly. So we're not going to go there. We're just going to do the basic thing here. So the way I understand it is when we come to belief, the Ruach takes up residence with our Holy Spirit, and that's the born anew part. So then it's our job to bring our body, our mind, our will, and emotions under the authority of the Spirit. Right? So that's where we're trying to go. But things pop out. Whether it's the way you think or what your body wants, it's popping out. So we're in that process of trying to get everything under the authority. Here's the spiritual part, the salvation part. Here's the sanctification part. Okay? Now the truth of the matter is, he doesn't find us this way with our spirit uppermost and most connected to Yahweh. Usually we're this way. Our spirit down here, that's foolishness, to the natural man. And we're listening a whole bunch more to our soul, our thinking, our emotions, and our physical body. So that's where we are. So when the Holy Spirit finds us and takes up residence with us, it's from here. And not only do we have to bring it under authority, we also need to get turned right side up. So that's the second part. Now there's step one in the sanctification process we are making in the early steps. And then here's that 2, getting turned right side up till you're more mature. Now Belinda, a number of years ago, said she realized that she was living her life right about here. Because you don't want to be too fanatical and let church have too big a role in your life, because then people will just think you're really strange. So you try to make sure that God has equal authority with everything else. That's not what the scripture says. We're supposed to be turned completely right side up. So the way we use this in our community, and I've used it with clients, people that I work with, is, we'll hear something going on and we'll say, so are you right side up yet? Or what's popping out today? what do we need to deal with that's popping out here? So it just makes it easier. Use all that jargon and stuff. So I hope it becomes something that you can use as well. It's true, I think, that most of us would not want to use any material that would contradict the Word. And yet it's also true that there are many specifics of things that are not fully detailed in the Scripture. Comparison can be made to science, and yet not all of science is found in the pages of Scripture. But anything that is truly true science will be consistent and in harmony with it. I didn't see any jet propulsion engines in there, but the principles that make it possible for them to work are there. The same thing is true for our mind, will, and emotions. And again, this is part of our effort to find a common language for people who are in transition and coming from all these different perspectives. When I was looking for help to help people with the severe trauma, I searched everywhere. I read every book I could find on every faith background. I read every professional literature I could find on severe trauma. 3.5 years of intensive study. I should probably have a doctorate in that. But what I did come to, the International Center for Biblical Counseling Spiritual Warfare Conferences. I attended that for 10 years in the 90s. And there I met Jim Wilder, who was a pastor psychologist, working with a whole clinic with hundreds of people with a severe trauma, desperately trying to find a way to help them without further traumatizing them by making them think about all the stuff that happened. Long story short, through all of their work, they eventually came to this composite work, an effort to unify all the principles that have to do with healthy counseling, recovery, pastoral care, prayer ministry, deliverance, inner healing, child rearing, body life, and health. And this is called Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, and we call it the Life Model for short. And it's a program that does not use any psychiatric terminology at all. It's biblically based, but it is traditional Christian biblically based, not Torah. So there's part of it that we can use and we're comfortable with, and there's part of it we say, okay, we probably won't go there. I have a few books available out at the table, and I did start writing an article and put copies of that in there to help differentiate where we're okay with it, that it's consistent with Torah, and where we see that it's going astray, what we're not comfortable with. This program is used all over the country by almost every major ministry that's dealing with trauma. The main part of it that we use is the Life Model Maturity Chart. So when scriptures say, be holy, be set apart, be mature, in effect, be complete, okay, we can hear that, and we have some kind of an idea in our head of what that might mean and what it might look like, but we don't necessarily have a shared definition of that. So Life Model has helped us do that by looking at the functions and what people are experiencing as they go through it. So here we are. The primary task of infants 0 to 3 is learning to receive. Believe it or not, that can be a very difficult thing for people to do, to learn to receive. A friend of mine from high school died of cancer last year, and her husband said that was his hardest thing, because they're usually the ones that was helping other people and bringing meals, and so it was really weird to him to have meals being brought to their door. He said, so that was my biggest learning during all of her illness, is I had to learn how to receive. I'm thinking, Life Model, we need to teach you about Life Model, because even when we're grown up, we may not know. And truthfully, when you have people who are in great need and they find somebody that can help, sometimes they don't even recognize it. Wounded baby birds bite, and people do that too. Age groups, children 4 to 12, learning how to take care of yourself. There's a whole lot more information under each one of these, and we have a basic chart available at the table. An adult, now you're learning not only how to take care of yourself, but yourself plus one significant other person. Then there's the parenting stage, where you're learning how to do sacrificial care of the children. So there are times when your personal needs have to be set aside for the well-being of your children, but not because you're being codependent and unhealthy and all of that stuff, but it's appropriate. And finally, we have the elder stage, when your youngest child has reached an adult level And now you're free to apply what you've understood and been taught to your whole community. So we would understand elders as those people who have matured a degree of maturity and who are now essentially helping to parent the whole community. And there's an awful lot of people, I can tell you as a clinical social worker doing marriage and family therapy for almost 30 years, I started seeing more and more people who couldn't be rehabilitated because they were never habilitated in the first place. So it made it pretty hard to do. So this understanding, I think, would really be beneficial for people. The other thing we like about what Jim and his group did was they list what it looks like when somebody has achieved all these skills at the various steps in their life and how functional they are and what wonderful, nice white sheep they are in your assembly, and they know how to help and they don't have too many troubles. It also shows us what it looks like when skills have not been accomplished. So when you see people who are, in the psychiatric world, you've heard terms like bipolar, right? Borderline personality, those kinds of things. Those are terminology. They don't really accomplish anything except to label something. Whereas what Jim and company have done is to identify the behaviors and to find out what is in the background that led to it. And so here's the next part that's really cool. What can a community and a family do in each situation when you figure out, there's a maturity hole there. The person themselves can know that, and people around them can know that. So in our community, we've done evaluations for everybody. So we all know each other's strengths and weaknesses, so there's no point in trying to hide anything anymore because it's too late to save face. It's time to be ready for Messiah. It's time to be ready without spot and blemish. And the life model helps us do that. You know that the adversary is prowling around looking for whom he can devour, right? Who do you think is most vulnerable? Remember those rolling stones from yesterday? The living stone, but the one that's rolling along and hasn't really settled in anywhere? What about the standing stone alone, who's isolated for whatever reason? How vulnerable are they to the adversary prowling around? What about those stones that get together in a pile once in a while? How are they? How much vulnerability do they have? And what about those who are being built into a wall? We've understood that we still need walls now because we're not back in the land yet, but these walls, as I said, are relational. There are different kinds of vulnerabilities, and you can maybe think about this a little bit more. People who are rolling along or in place are isolated, and they're probably more easily culled out and attacked because they don't have anybody to hold their shields up for them. Especially if you're too tired to hold your shield yourself, it's really good to have somebody around you to help shield and prayer and stand with you. The pile of living stones, they might have good heart and intent to be in a had, but they really haven't developed as a unit yet that knows how to keep rank. This is where I wanted to find a little vignette of a marching band where somebody goes out of step. Can you picture that in your mind? It's better than a video. So you have a snarl of trombones and snare drums in the middle of the field because somebody stepped the wrong way. In military terms, I think they call that friendly fire. We have some military people here, yes, where you accidentally shoot yourself in the foot or your people around you. Right. We don't want to do that. I think an awful lot of that is happening. There's a vulnerability there, and a vulnerability to innuendos and strife and division because we don't know what our place is and where we fit and how Yahweh is using us and how we're supposed to be working together. Am I a hand or am I a foot, right? In the wall situation, the people are in covenant unity. They're holding on what is good and keeping out what is bad. But the risk, I think, for that is that we're probably first in the crosshairs of the evil one to find our weaknesses. So there again, we think it's important to be addressing all those things that might be offendable. I believe it was, not Tozer, Oswald Chambers. He said that Yahweh will organize, he would say, Lord, Yahweh will organize things to expose everything that's offendable within you until it's all gone, so that you'll have no reason to take offense and you'll have no way for the enemy to put a hook in you and cause division. That's what we're looking for, right? To be made without spot and wrinkle. The time is at hand. The remnant bride is being called out. You know you're experiencing it, being made without spot and wrinkle. How are his people supposed to respond in the middle of this? How do we conduct our lives in the middle of so much wickedness that the world has not known since the time of Noah? Have you thought about that? How many years he was preaching and nobody came with him except his children? Wow, I would like to have that much confidence and endurance for that long. Here's one set of instructions that was provided by Messiah through his revelation to John that specifically applies to this season. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. And he which is filthy, let him be filthy still. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, set apart, let him be holy or set apart still. My question is that let or a command to let it be, like in let there be light? Or is it allow it to happen? I don't have an answer. I think it might be both. So I suggest that each one of us must go through a learning process as we come face to face with what is really happening now, individually and as a group. As we grapple with the different approaches to deal with the schemes of the adversary to bring chaos and strife and division to us, we are influenced a lot by what we hear other people say and what we see them do. As we honor this direction through John and allow these things to occur, we're seeing the playing out of several concepts. The separation of the sheep and the goats, and the sheep and the sheep. If you don't know that one, go look it up in Ezekiel. The separation of the wheat and the tares, the discernment of the good and the bad fruit. At this season, as in Noah's day, there's no longer a question of being able to address this with human intervention alone. It's gone far beyond that, like the thorns and thistles that have overrun the field, and the only thing that will take them out is fire. In this case, it's Messiah's fire. When he comes with the fire in his eyes, the two-edged sword. Yeah. He came the first time with that staff, correcting and directing, disciplining, as he's continued to do through the Ruach and his word. But when he comes back this time, we're looking at the conquering king, and there'll be no more gentle correction. There will be judgment. There will be the iron rod. There will be fire. Those thorns and thistles will be taken care of. So as we're in this process and we're coming out, we're also going to see some people who were strong enough to make that break. You all know how powerful that tie and that the fabric that your life was woven in with other people who keep the tree and the egg festival and all those other things, right? So to break away from that takes tremendous strength. Because you're stepping out of tradition, of generations sometimes. I believe that there's strongholds personally, family generation strongholds, institutional strongholds, generational strongholds that are all over us in our mind, will, and emotions. And those strongholds can still be there even when the Spirit is present, but they're still part of that popping out thing. So these people, all of us, everybody who's made this step, hallelujah and amen. It's a big step. And it's because of our zeal and our hunger to know Messiah better. And we put up with all the rest of that. But you know what? I bet everybody here has got a lot of people you're praying for, right? When will their eyes be open? Soon? How long? That kind of thing. But here's the downside of that. Having that tenacity and that ability to individuate from your former faith community may actually equal a resistance to commitment or oppositional behavior once you come into that new group. So you finally find them, but then you find yourself feeling a little bit suspicious and you're a little bit protective of your own turf. And you're not quite sure whether you should commit to any new group because I don't want to be tricked again. I was tricked once, I don't want to be tricked again. So those people might find it easier to walk away again rather than to pray, stay, and not run away. That's one of our pithy maxims that we talk about. So what recommendations can we make? We think that it's important for a community to develop a strong community identity and maxims. This is what it is like us to do. Who are we as a people? Pray, stay, and not run away. That's part of who we are. How about remember, remember, remember? Remember who he is, remember what he's done for me. Remember who I am, remember who he's made me to be. You know, you can take it a lot of different directions. Remember, remember, remember. So whatever Yahweh is doing in your community, identify them and hold on to them. Those are pieces of learning and teaching that he's giving you to help you find that echad with one another when with him. Again, we recommend the plurality of leadership. Prophet, priest, and king is often seen in the scriptures. There's also the question of judges being raised up again now at this time as at the first. So we think there'll be judge shepherds and judge teachers and, you know, judge evangelists, and, you know, but they'll all have that tone. That was told to us in Isaiah. We definitely recommend interactive study, and we recommend taking time to teach your people study skills, because we don't want to be dependent on whatever the latest fad of teaching that happens to come by is. But it does take time and it does take patience. So our community has spent a couple of years, and I recommend this to others, studying thematic study, studying pictographic, you know, the Paleo-Hebrew kinds of things, chiastic structure, parallelisms, the significance of numbers and colors and those sorts of things. So our whole community is interactive, and once you do that, again, it's so lively and it's so fun, especially when everybody's reading from a different translation and we find out that there's a word missing in that translation over there. That one is not getting the full intent. It feels just joyful to be able to do that and share that. Although Janelle is our primary leader with teaching gifts, so she's been very instrumental in giving us insights that help us shape what's going on. We also think it's really important to develop a solid focus on worship and the discipline of worship. Because I don't know about you guys, but you know, I grew up Lutheran. I told you before, frozen chosen. So for me, you know, when I was growing up, you know, you would sing 4 hymns during the day, during the service, and you would usually do like 1, 3, and 5 verses, because it would take too long if you sing all of it, right? And so the point was to keep the service moving along, I think. But for us, that's not what the purpose is. For us, the purpose is to fully enter into his presence and to bring your whole self into his presence, all of your mind, will, and emotion, with all of your heart and strength. And it takes a whole lot more to dance through worship and wave flags through worship while you're keeping your mind on him. It's not playing. I know I've had some people think that people who are doing congregational worship dance or banners, they think it's playing. It's not. It can be if people are just playing at it. But it also is an extension of worship. And when you are able to set aside yourself and all that junk of the world and enter fully into praise, it is a discipline and it takes time. For a while we had a Kingdom of Death box that I set out in the middle, had paper and pencil in it, you know, so whatever is bugging you, what's on your mind as you're coming here, you want to just write it on here and fold it up and stick it in the Kingdom of Death box, because that's what it is. It's got to do with all that stuff out there. It doesn't have to do with life and why we're gathered here for Shabbat. And then, of course, nobody reads it. And, you know, nobody ever went back to collect them again afterwards either. So we just shred them and commit them to Yeshua. We also recommend the development of a corporate prayer style. It's a different thing to be together with people and everybody is praying what is on their mind than when everybody is in unity and you feel the sense of the Spirit moving so that you're all in harmony. Have you experienced that? I call it a living, moving sea of prayer. I first experienced that at the ICBC conferences. So I had to wait every 2 years to experience it again, because I said at that time if the Holy Spirit showed up at our church, even though it was a good church, I think somebody would have told him to leave because he was out of order. So I don't think that you can impose any of these things onto a group. It needs to grow from their willingness to lean into the Ruach's leading. And otherwise, if you try to impose it, then I think you run the risk of having programs without spirit, which become a form of godliness without his power. So we can't just bring a group together and say, this is what we're going to do now. It takes longer to help to cultivate the relationships and invite the Spirit's work and support the Spirit's work and encourage and exhort. I provided here Just a copy of our community definition. We would not at all think that everybody would have the exact same definition. But I can tell you that it took us, I think, 3 weeks of a long time of discussion, because every single phrase in there was processed. Do we really mean that? And what do we want to say? And is that right? So this is part of what we did a number of years ago. And I said there's a copy for that out there. A multi-generational group of interdependent, like-minded people with a clear, stable identity based in Yahweh, mutually defined and articulated as in a growing organism, not organization, with structure, authority, and boundaries, generally based in recognition of attained maturity and the shared goal of set-apart living in daily interaction. It is an interdependent network of covenant relationships based in Echad with Messiah Yeshua. So, I mean, you're welcome to, consider parts of it, but ask the Ruach what he wants you in your community to develop. The second thing I provided here is our mission statement, which seemed always long until we began studying from the sevens, and we understood that all of the sevens, which is each of the spirit resting on the stump of Jesse, right, Isaiah 11, each one of our goals fit under each one of those spirits. So we put our goals chart together this way, and there's a long narrative describing how we as a community walk. This was really important. And even so, I still have to bring it up every now and then and remind people. It's funny how your mind drifts when you're not thinking about something. That's why Yahweh gave us the feast every week and then the annual cycle, so that we would be reminded to keep walking in it. And again, we don't think that everybody's going to adopt the same thing, but we would encourage you to ask Yahweh, what is your leading for this community? Where are the scripture references that connect to how you want us to walk? Because people have a hard time learning, I put together a PowerPoint a few years ago, Clues for Shepherds. I started writing only for leaders first, and I was thinking I would do like a password protection part of the seed or site or something like that. And no, I got corrected pretty soon, because it's not only leaders who need to understand these things. In our understanding, members also need to know what constitutes good leadership. Otherwise, how will they know which is a good community choose to walk with? And otherwise, how will they know to help accountability matters for the people in leadership? So it needs to be both ways. So even if you don't think you're ever going to be in leadership, please pay attention anyway and go ahead and learn something about this so you can be a part of bringing to the group what they need. This one takes about an hour and a half, I think, to go through. And I did have some sample group processes. I've got 11 minutes. Okay. This is part of what's included in the Clues for Shepherds course. These are some questions that you can consider, especially if you're having a group interaction in your assembly and you're having trouble coming to consensus, or you see something's wrong, but you don't really know what. Think to yourself, how did various people behave? Who was doing what? Who offered serious considerations? Who was emotional or irrational? Who appeared to be the stabilizing influence? Or who appeared to be the agitators in the group? This helps you with your prayer focus, not because you're going to try and corner them, but helps you in your prayer focus to know. Were these predictable behaviors? Do these people act like that all the time? Is the one who's agitating today agitated last week and the week before that? Or the one who's behaving irrationally, have they been doing that just this week because there's something going on in their life? Or have they been irrational for a long time? What do I need to do to help that sheep? How can I do that? Do you find yourself dreading to hear from somebody? Do you find yourself yearning to hear from somebody? Did anybody specifically side with anybody else? That will help you see some of the unholy groupings that can go on in a community where people start the division and the strife. That's written about in my Messy Expectations series, by the way, if you want more on that. But I think here is the big one. What behavior was I contributing personally, considering each of these same questions? Because while we're looking out there, it's the speck in the log thing. We need to do both. I also have a little bit longer opportunity to study this. I call it 10 proven steps toward a stable, set-apart fellowship, because these factors have been important for our community and they're important for other communities. This is available by email. You can fill it in or complete it in 10 weeks. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours reading each week. You can address it individually. You can address it with your whole group. You can arrange for a Skype conversation with me, and I'll go over, if there's something that doesn't make sense to you. It does not tell you what to do. It just asks questions to help you in your discernment process of what the Holy Spirit is speaking to you and what your community needs. There's more information on our website and at our table. The funny thing is, when I did that leadership study 15 years ago, here was a list of the struggles that people were having in Messianic fellowships then. Looks pretty similar to what we're still struggling with now. And I thought if there was only maybe 1%, maybe even 10% of communities that were having all of these interpersonal struggles, because interpersonal struggles that are unresolved is the primary reason that people leave a fellowship. If it was only 10% of the group, I would think, well, it's just those people in that group. They don't know how to do this. But from what I'm seeing, it's more like 50%. And I'm very grateful for 50% of the people who've been able to be in fellowships and not have to leave because there's some craziness going on. But still, almost 50% across the board of the different groups I've checked, they're within 5 or 10 percentage points. And again, it's a really small number here, so it's not, I don't have 3,000 people. So if I had that many, then I could draw some larger conclusions. But it's still the same kind of stuff. And I don't think that's really what Yahweh wants for us, do you? I think we should be moving on. Although there are many people who are still feeling isolated and obligated to walk alone, we see that as still being an element of being in exile and dispersion. He may very well ask some of us to walk alone for a season or even for a lifetime, but we still believe that his ultimate purpose is to build us up as living stones, a spiritual house, sheep to shepherds, walls to house, spiritual house to bride, to New Jerusalem. That's the provision, that's the vision we all need to be holding out for us. It's good to be keeping the feasts and gathering every Shabbat. That's not the only thing. There's more to it to make it come together. We believe that Abba intended each community to have their own generations of those at parent and elder level maturity who are to be of wise and prayerful guidance to the younger ones. We think that a key to that is the development of mutual confidence and actually depth of mutual confidence between the members and those in leadership roles. And for a while we tried not to have leaders. We just said Yeshua is our leader. Well, then we had somebody come in who said, I'll come under your leadership, and he was saying, this is my, how did he say it? This is my woman, or something to that. And we found out that he wasn't really married. You remember him, don't you? Yeah, that was Leah, yeah. Lady, that's what he said, this is my lady. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then it's like, well, okay, I guess we do have to step in here and say there's some boundaries here because, yeah, we need to be careful about what we're allowing in. So as much as it's difficult and you sometimes feel like you don't want to be a shepherd, you don't want to take those slings and arrows, it's really necessary for somebody to do that if the group is going to grow and mature. Another key element is the spiritual process as the whole community enters into prayerfully expose anything that's not pleasing to him to be exposed and well resolved. It took us a year to learn to add to that, and please give us an extra measure of joy and confidence while we're doing this, because it's kind of messy when these things are coming forward. We actually think that no community can ever have too many elders. Because again, we have the picture from Ephesians. Here's one of our goals that we're growing to, right? Then we will no longer be infants, tossed about by the waves and carried about by every wind of teaching, and by the clever cunning of men and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things, grow up into Christ himself, who is the head. So as I'm wrapping up here today, I'm kind of going back to the beginning. It begins with our personal faith and relationship with Messiah, the salvation part. Submit yourselves therefore to Yahweh. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Clearly he tells us that a lot of times, so we need to know how to do that. We have sheep who are recognizing that they're called to become like Yeshua, that spotless Lamb of Yahweh, and willing to enter the process with shepherds and teachers who are willing to walk together. And it isn't always pretty, and it isn't always fun, but the fruit is nice. You're good to see that when that grows. Our assembly level work, we need the development of those living stones to grow up to be like the living stone, Yeshua, and to be built together in him, knowing our place, being able to wisely discern both good and evil schemes. We need to be able to discern and act as needed for the good of defending the less mature and the weaker until they too can grow up and take their place on the wall. None of this seems to happen as fast as I'd like to see. I was already champing at the bit, 2 years in, and we started seeing a whole lot more fruit around, 15 years, I think? 15, 16 years, and we were dealing with some generational bloodline issues, and as we got those things cleared up, it was just awesome. But we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't been praying for him to expose it. So we want to be built up like those walls. He is not in an urgent hurry like we always are. And I have to say that I really would like him to move faster a lot of times. So that would be, it jumped way ahead for me. That would be my reminder. Blessed are those who wait for the Lord, for they will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not be faint. We believe it is his time for us to be speaking out. We know a whole lot more now about sheep coming in, and bedraggled ones and white ones. And we know a lot more about shepherds, and we know a lot more about finding new pastures, and we know a lot more about walls, and what happens if you have mature leadership, and what happens if you don't. And we know what happens if you have good leadership, but people can't recognize it. We know more, too, about the personification of those sheep as living stones after Messiah, and the progression to becoming a wall to surround and join and protect, and ultimately to become the spiritual house of his people. Our calling is to help restore and mature and call to return to the ancient paths to prepare Messiah's remnant bride. We want to draw on both Mama and Papa's Torah to keep balance in teaching the word and character development. And we want to remind people to keep balance in both individual and the group corporate assembly needs as well. We want to remind people to ask in advance for his exposure and cleaning out so that the adversary has no place in us, in any part of us, to break up our unity and echad with one another and with him. Then we will be that strong, pure, spotless bride in community without wrinkle, who will stand in that day with him and not faint. So once again, Abba Father, I do ask that you give these words and ideas that are here, that are from you, give them wings to fly directly where you want them to go, and cause anything to fall to the ground that is not helpful to you. Please cement in our minds what you want us to know. I join with those here to invite your presence into all of our assemblies, whether they be family in homes or a larger gathering. Make us ready in the ways that you know each one of us needs. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Amen, may it be so. Thank you for your attention.